Please welcome to the stage transport engineer and progressive advocate, Matt Pinder.
Good morning. If there's one thing that any of you here today know about me, it's that I love cycling. Cycling has been with me and been a part of me throughout my entire life. When I was a young kid, I'd get together with my friends on Saturdays and we'd bike to the nearest convenience store to get milkshakes. As a teenager, I'd bike to my job on the edge of town, washing dishes at a Swiss chalet for 5 hours. And as a young adult, I'd bike frantically to and from my classes, sometimes going a little bit too fast and slipping on snow or ice. Lately, though, my love for cycling has taken an entirely new shape in the form of bike rides with my daughter, Alia. Those of you in the audience who are parents will hopefully understand this. When you have something that you love so much and you get to share it with someone that you love so much, the feeling is incredible. Cycling is something that has grown with me and shaped me throughout my entire life. My relationship with it is deep and complex. Some days, like today, I'm just getting up and getting somewhere I need to go. Other days, I'm strapping my tent and camping gear to the back of my bike and I'm heading out of town for a few days. Through cycling, I've found independence, discovery, even love. Cycling was present on, of course, the first few dates with the love of my life. I started advocating for cycling, though, not because I want more bike lanes for myself, but because I saw the opportunities that cycling had given me, and I wanted others to have those same opportunities. I'm going to try to present and convince you all of an idea that has become so central to my existence today. The idea that when you build a city for cycling, everyone benefits. To get there, I'm going to take you on a trip with me to Amsterdam, and we're going to discover what it truly means to cycle in a city built for cycling. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about my line of work and how I use creativity to bring the benefits of the cycling city back here to Canada. And finally, I'm going to wrap it all up by bringing it back here to Ottawa, and I'm going to tell you why I am convinced that this city is on the cusp of becoming North America's next cycling city, and what I think we still need to do to get there. I'm hoping that by the end of this talk, you'll all be convinced of this idea that when you build a city for cycling, everyone benefits. Now, there is a lot to unpack about why the Dutch cycle so much. But in 2017, when I set out on a trip to the Netherlands to take a 3-week course called Planning the Cycling City, I was confident that I could soak all of it up. I don't think there's ever been a 3-week period in my life where I have been so continuously stimulated. To the extreme, every moment of every day was spent cycling, watching people cycle, studying cycling, or cycling to the bar with new friends. I was in my happy place. And I saw some incredible things. I saw kids cycling on bikes with their parents. I saw adults sharing the same bike. I saw torrential downpours where people just kept going on their merry ways. And I saw children, teens, cycling independently and happily without their parents, without a chaperone, around their own communities. So what is it truly like to cycle in a cycling city? Well, first, in a cycling city, cycling is easy. It's thoughtless, intuitive, it's connected. If you need to go somewhere, no matter where that is, there will be multiple safe routes for you to get there. There will be comfortable bike parking at the other end. And chances are it might even be faster and certainly cheaper than driving. Second, in a cycling city, cycling is ordinary. It's not a political view. It's not a lifestyle choice. It's just something that you do with everyone else. How many of you here today, put your hand up, own a vacuum cleaner? Have you ever referred to yourself as a vacuum enthusiast? Maybe some weirdos here. When was the last time you started a conversation with a friend by telling them about the features of your new vacuum? Yeah, okay, there's some Dyson owners here, I'm sure. To the Dutch, the bicycle is like a vacuum. It is something you own, you use daily, and you don't think about it. It's just there. It just is. Third, in a cycling city, cycling is social. Even if you're going somewhere by yourself, you step out your door and you join the throngs of cyclists traveling down the street. If you see someone you know along the way, and chances are you will, it's easy enough to throw them a wave or even pull over and chat for a bit. Fourth, and this is the most important, in a city built for cycling, it's not just the people cycling who benefit. In Amsterdam, the roads are safer for everyone, whether you're walking, cycling, taking transit, or driving. There's less cars, there's less traffic, less noise, less congestion. Did you know that the Netherlands consistently ranks as one of the best countries to drive in the world? People in cycling cities are happier, healthier, and they're more involved in their communities. When you build a city for cycling, everyone benefits. When I got back to Toronto, my feelings of excitement and exhilaration quickly turned to intimidation as I realized how big this chasm was between the cycling mecca and home. What's more, I started to feel lonely. Cycling around Amsterdam, I'd gotten used to constantly being part of the swarm, as my professor would call it. Biking around Toronto, I felt disconnected. I knew then, though, that my professional raison d'être would be to take the success of the Netherlands and figure out how to translate it over here to Canada. Since then, every decision I've made, everywhere I've gone, this has been on my mind. It's why I moved here to Ottawa to be an engineer who designs bike lanes. It's why I started a bicycle-themed storytelling event called Bike Minds. It's why I write blogs and op-eds. And it's why I'm here talking to you all today. Now, people often assume that engineers are not the creative type. They think that we take some numbers, we run them through our calculator brains over and over and over until you spit out some data, and you do that enough times until you have something like a bridge. Voila. Truth is, engineers use creativity all the time. We regularly encounter situations where there's no established standards or practice, and we have to make interpretations. We have to import ideas from elsewhere to solve problems creatively. Let me give you an example of what I mean. This intersection in Canmore, Alberta, has some very unique features that you might not have seen elsewhere, and that you might only see at a few intersections in North America. Can you spot them? Shout out some ideas. What do you see here that's different? Okay, one of my friends is here. He already knows the answer. Thanks, Fareed. So there's a lot going on here that's different. We've got bikes and pedestrians in a different spot, but probably the average person doesn't notice the thing that is actually illegal about this intersection. The engineers who designed this intersection literally broke the rules. And they had good reason to do so, because they had an idea that they knew had been tested elsewhere that would bring safety benefits. And that is the fact that the traffic lights at this intersection are actually on the near side. Such a small little thing. They're usually on the far side. And in Alberta, there's a law that requires that they be on the far side. So what did the engineers get for this disruptive innovation? Well, of course, they got the safety benefits that they hoped for. But in addition to that, they won an innovation award from the very jurisdiction that had set the rules that they had broken. So let me tell you about an example of one of my projects, the first project I worked on as a junior engineer. My firm was hired to design a Dutch-style protected intersection in Toronto. Now, a protected intersection looks a little bit different from normal ones, and it's designed to prioritize the safety of pedestrians and cyclists. You might be familiar with some of them from riding around Ottawa. But at the time, in 2019, there was no more than a handful of these built across North America. We didn't have established guidelines or standards for their design. I hadn't designed one before. Our civil engineer hadn't, nor had our signals engineer. And this was going to be Toronto's first protected intersection. Talk about an environment where you need to be creative. I got to work with my pencil, sketching out ideas, imagining curbs, sidewalks, asphalt, signals, pavement markings, signage. Slowly, my designs and ideas evolved into an engineering drawing. We began to work our way through city reviews. We patiently persisted as even our own signals engineer got cold feet and began to get nervous about whether this design would achieve its benefits. But we made it to the end. 3 years later, concrete and asphalt were poured, and what had been no more than a sketch on a piece of paper 3 years ago became reality. Do you know how cool it feels as an engineer to literally draw something that becomes permanent infrastructure in your community? The feeling is incredible. Now, this is the kind of work that it takes today to innovate and bring the benefits of the cycling city over to Canada. It's not easy. We're constantly working in environments where we need to work around existing rules, and we need to work hard to convince others of those benefits. But luckily, today, innovation travels at the speed of Twitter. Someone in Calgary, Halifax, Edmonton sees this design and says, I want that in my community too. Engineers who are originally reluctant of this idea become more comfortable as they see it built in the real world. Slowly but surely, people begin to realize that when you build a city for cycling, everyone benefits. So, I've told you all a little bit about myself. I've told you how my brain literally exploded when I discovered the cycling city of Amsterdam. And I've told you about how I apply creativity in my work and how I've been working ever since to bring those benefits back here to Canada. Now it's time to take this all about you and talk about this city that we all call home. I'm told that the people who come to these talks are quite community-minded, so I'm going to guess that means a higher than average involvement in municipal politics. Put your hand up. How many of you voted in the last election? Nice. That's good to see. That's definitely higher than average. You might recall, then, a certain candidate's policy to build $250 million worth of bike infrastructure in this city. Nice. We got some cheers. How many of you saw that announcement and thought, wow, that is amazing. I don't need to look at a single other platform issue. They have my vote. Yeah, we got a couple. How many of you saw that and thought, I hate cyclists. We should be ripping up bike lanes and ticketing them instead? Okay, phew. How many of you were somewhere in the middle thinking, yeah, cycling is great and all, but is this really the best idea? Well, you're not alone. Well, yes, I was beyond excited by this idea. It quickly became clear that it had fallen on skeptical ears. Ottawans weren't convinced that this was the best use of our public money. Instead of imagining their children being able to independently move around their cities, they saw unnecessary expenditures. Instead of imagining streets where it was easier to get around even by car, they saw more congestion. And instead of imagining a happier, healthier city moving on two wheels, they saw a minority group of annoying cyclists getting a disproportionate amount of city funds. Now, the election is in the past, but I want to rehash that idea with you all today, that notion that Ottawa can't and won't ever be a cycling city. The city has a lot more going for it than you probably appreciate. First, this is a city that shows up to bike. Thanks to the investments of the NCC decades ago, we have a pathway network that covers this entire city. Regardless of where you live, you're probably within a few kilometers of a bike path that you can hop on it and cycle for dozens of kilometers without encountering traffic. Do you know how many other cities have something like this? This has been the backbone of our city's growth. Look no further than the success of Sunday bike days and the closures of the parkways that happened during the pandemic. This is a city that shows up to cycle. Second, our city has a legacy of innovation and experimentation when it comes to building bike infrastructure. You might recognize that photo on the left, the Laurier bike lanes. Did you know that they were the first protected bike lanes built in Ontario when they went in 12 years ago? The top right is a raised cycle track on Churchill Avenue. Again, a first for Ontario when it went in 9 years ago. On the bottom right is a Dutch-style protected intersection. Ottawa built its first one of those 6 years ago, also the first in Ontario, has since built dozens more, and last year published a design guide for producing them that won a national award. This is a city that is willing to experiment and innovate when it comes to designing bike infrastructure. Third is politics. We have a surprisingly favorable environment for cycling in Ottawa. Instead of arguing about whether we should support cycling, our politicians are arguing about how much support it should be given. This is a really nice place to be. Just last week, this councillor from Orleans was criticizing the city's latest bike plan for not having enough bike infrastructure in her ward. And fourth, and this is what I'm most excited about, is what we have to look forward to in the years to come. You see, unlike other cities, Ottawa has this policy that whenever a new road is built or rebuilt, it needs to be put back with safe, separated cycling infrastructure and intersections. This means that instead of having a small cycling budget making tweaks here and there over the years, we're going to see massive improvements. This is a map produced by a colleague of mine, Patrick, and it shows the safe cycling routes in Ottawa today. When we forecast forward and look at what it will look like with all the routes currently planned, it starts to look like this. 12 years ago, we put in our first protected bike lanes. Think about where we will be another 12 years from now. Yeah, lots to be happy about. Okay, but obviously I'm here because we're not a cycling city yet, but I think we're really close to getting there. And I have 3 areas for improvement that I think if we can do these things, we will truly realize the benefits. First point. In Ottawa's core, it's decently walkable, it's decently easy to get around on foot. But once you get outside the core, everything here, everything is built for cars. We have wide, fast roads, we have giant parking lots, we have buildings set way back from the street, miserable places to walk, and a general absence of places to bike. I'm going to give you an example of what I think is one of our biggest opportunities to change that in Ottawa. This is a photo from Merivale Road. Merivale Road has a lot of stuff on it. It has cafes, restaurants, shops, grocery stores, a high school, a library, medical facilities, offices. This is a place that a lot of people need to go. And on a busy day, it is so hard to move around this street, even by car. To drive from Hunt Club to Baseline on a busy day can take as much as 20 minutes. That means you're moving at an average of 10 kilometers an hour. Surely we can do better. This is a street and a street environment that has been designed exclusively for cars, and yet it still sucks to drive there. Add to this the fact that the city has plans to add thousands of residents along this corridor, and you reach a transportation dilemma. Yes, we could do what we've always done and spend millions of dollars to add just another lane to this street, and maybe that'll fix it. But this street is already 7 lanes wide in some places. Maybe there needs to be a different approach taken. What if instead of prioritizing cars in this environment, we built an environment for people walking, cycling, taking transit? This is exactly what a colleague of mine, Duncan, has done. Duncan imagines a Merivale Road with tram tracks running down the middle, with 2 lanes for cars, with wide cycle tracks, beautiful sidewalks, and giant street trees. Duncan imagines a Maryvale Road that is the heart of Nepean, a place where people are excited to go and hang out. Where a big and ugly intersection exists today, Duncan imagines Lotta Square, a place carved out for people to hang out on a nice day, with street-facing shops, beautiful environments. These are the kind of environments that we love to rave about when we get back from our European vacations. I'm sure everyone here has done that. We need to work harder to build these environments in our home. And of course, you see bike lanes in this photo, but this is about so much more than cycling, because when you build a city for cycling, everyone benefits. Okay, for my next point, this is a photo of Ottawa's Montreal Road. The city just finished ripping it up and putting it back, spent millions of dollars to do it, and this is a street that is trying to do a lot. Ottawa has this idea that whenever we build a street, we need to do a balanced approach. That means every mode gets everything. The problem is, when you try to accommodate everyone, you prioritize no one. This street is an arterial road for traffic. It's a transit priority corridor. It's a bike route. It's a mixed-use street with pedestrian-oriented shops. Something's got to give. The organizers of this talk encouraged me to share some of my controversial opinions. So here's one of them. I think we totally missed the mark with this project. This was a chance to deprioritize driving in order to prioritize people walking and existing in this environment. What would that have looked like, though, if we had chosen to actively deprioritize driving? Well, we wouldn't have a lot of traffic. We wouldn't need 3 lanes for cars. We wouldn't even need traffic lights anymore. Buses would flow smoothly. People would be able to ride in the street without fear of car traffic. With all that extra space, we'd be able to widen the sidewalks, build beautiful street trees, add patios, create a nice place to exist. This is a street in the Netherlands of the same proportions of Montreal Road. Can you see how different this looks when our priorities change? And of course, this is not a street that is about cyclists. It was built with cyclists in mind, sure, but this is a nice place to exist. This is a place where developers want to build nice buildings, a place where the community can feel proud of. Again, when you build a city for cycling, everyone benefits. Third example, I hope many of you are familiar with this one. Those construction cones that were up for a couple of years with no construction. This is the Bank Street Bridge near Lansdowne. And for years, it carried 4 lanes of fast-moving car traffic. It was a miserable place to walk and a death trap to cycle on. The city tried what it could by adding some pavement markings and signage, but of course, that didn't change things. When the pandemic occurred, the local councillor saw an opportunity and a necessity to rethink how this bridge was configured. They were able to convince city staff to put up a row of cones in each direction and close 1 lane each way to cars and give it over to people walking and cycling. How many of you walked or cycled over this bridge during those changes? Wow, that's really great. So I'm sure you can appreciate how different it was. People cycling had their own comfortable space. I would see people biking with their kids on this bridge, something that was unimaginable before. People walking didn't have to walk next to high-speed traffic anymore, or weave their way through bikes who were too nervous to be on the road. But here's the thing, this is an example of an experiment on our streets. We did something low cost, quickly, without asking a lot of permission. And this was amazing because the public was able to actually engage with this design in real time. Instead of the traditional process where we have consultations and we roll out papers on a table and we ask people to come to an inconvenient location on a Tuesday evening when they're trying to put their kids to bed, we just put this out there for people to see and interact with. People loved it. And when this bridge was rebuilt last year, it was put back differently. It was put back with 3 lanes for cars, with raised cycle tracks and wider sidewalks. This is something that people would have said was unimaginable just 5 years ago. And of course, cyclists benefit from this design, but I'm sure people who've walked over this bridge since then can also see that things are better. When you build a city for cycling, everyone benefits. Okay, time to wrap things up. I've told you a bit about myself, how I became so passionate about this issue, how I discovered the bike city of Amsterdam, and how I've been working creatively ever since to bring those ideas back here. I've told you why I truly, genuinely believe that Ottawa is on the cusp of becoming the next cycling city, and what I think are the opportunities for us to truly get there. Now it's time to leave you with a bit of homework. I have 3 action items that I want you all to take away from this talk. And hopefully I've convinced you, even just a little bit, of this notion that when you build a cycling city, everyone benefits. First, I want you all to support walkable development in your communities. As I mentioned, we have a general absence of places for people outside of the city's downtown. The city's working hard to make these possible, but so often, a minority group of vocal residents will show up to oppose these kind of developments. And so often, the people who support these things don't make the time and effort to tell their councillor that they do. Make sure the city knows that if you want this kind of stuff in your community, that you're telling them. Next, I want you to be like Duncan. You don't need Photoshop skills or complex video editing skills. You just need to reimagine your own community. Pick a street that you don't like or an intersection and think about how it could be different. Even just think about the problems and tell your councillor. We live in a democratic society. You are all citizens of that society. Change happens when you make your voice heard. And finally, I'm sure you knew this was coming. Whether or not you bike, even if you have no intention of your life to ever step on a bike, I want you all to support cycling improvements. Because when you build a city for bikes, everyone benefits. Let's try that one more time. When you build a city for bikes, everyone benefits. Thank you so much.
You can reach Matt on Twitter. He's quite active there. He's got quite a following, actually. beyondtheautomobile.com and Matt_Pinder@live is his email if you want to continue the conversation. But please give it up for Matt Pinder.
Thank you very much for your talk. I have a question, and the first sort of statement is partially in jest, but like, are you delusional? Let me qualify that a little bit. My name's Chris. I'm an architect working here in town. We share a lot of the same enthusiasm, a lot of the same viewpoints. Again, improving the city for cycling, everybody benefits, totally on board. But as someone who works with the city, works with developers, works hands-on with engineers all the time, it's really easy to become sort of jaded and like put off by the resistance. It like, been doing this for 10 years and it constantly in meetings sometimes feels like you're slogging through like waist-deep mud when we're talking about, you know, tens of millions of dollars, potentially billions of dollars on infrastructure for cars, road widening, things like that, and you're getting people like irate about a few $100,000 for bicycles. So my question, circling back to the delusional aspect of it, or maybe just a hopeless optimist, like how do you stay energized when you see this resistance, when you're in those meetings, when you're feeling the claw or the sort of drag of auto-centric development? How do you stay so optimistic?
That's a good question. Thanks for sharing. I do it because I think it's the only option. We have to stay positive. We have to stay optimistic. And hopefully if you were paying attention, when you look back a decade, you do see that things are moving. Things aren't always moving at the speed we want them to, trust me, I scroll Twitter and I get pissed and frustrated about things too. But I actively choose to filter that out. And when I interact with people, I bring my most positive self to the conversation because I know that ideas like this spread when you come across as inviting and positive. These are the kind of ways that you can inspire other people to join the fold. I think it's very understandable how you feel, and you're doing great work by fighting that good fight. But change really happens when the majority of the population understands this too, and when you all take small actions in your life to improve your communities.
Hey, great talk. Preaching to the converted for sure. I wanted to ask, short of strapping them to a bicycle, how do you think we can change the hearts and minds of people in this city that only drive, that have an antagonistic relationship with cyclists, who think that their car registration pays for roads and cyclists don't pay for infrastructure? There's so much misinformation and so much hesitance from a lot of people that haven't been on a bike since they're kids, and how do we get those people to understand and care about it?
Good question. Here's the thing. I told you all about that policy that when the city builds or rebuilds a road, it does it with cycling infrastructure. Well, here's the secret. The city's best cycling infrastructure is getting built in Barrhaven, in Canada, in Orleans, in those areas where those people live who don't see the benefits. So, whether or not they support or oppose cycling infrastructure, their kids are going to go out and ride on this stuff and tell them about how awesome it was. Ottawa's latest protected intersection just opened up near Fallowfield, way out in the southwest. So this is the amazing thing about having a strict policy, is you don't need to count on public support every time you want to do something. It's just, this is the new status quo, and we'll really start to see the benefits of this in the coming years.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I enjoyed it as well, but for what it's worth, you didn't have to bother. I was already sold. I knew it was going to be better for everyone.
Glad some of my people showed up.
But I guess what I wondered through the last municipal election, and I'm wondering about right now, is a little bit building on your point, Alex. We're not here to convert people necessarily, and maybe if all of the bike infrastructure investment in that municipal election was presented as something without the word bike, right? If it was about, people are nodding, it's not my idea. But, do we have to rebrand this idea of bike infrastructure and suddenly get these people who are like, well, I don't ride bikes, but yes, you have kids, you have elderly friends, you have blah, 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 right? So are we doing ourselves a disservice? Would things have been different if we shifted that focus from bikes, which do have a certain niche connotation?
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. There's lots of cross-sectional issues happening right now. We have a housing crisis, we have an environmental climate crisis, and talking about such a specific thing like bikes in the middle of all this does feel like a distraction sometimes. Another thing that I've done in my personal time is I founded this group called Better South Keys Center. I moved into the neighborhood of South Keys, or the suburbs, back a few years ago, and I was worried at the time that I wouldn't find my people there, that I'd encounter whatever I thought a suburbanite was, and I would meet nobody and I'd be miserable. But I took a different approach. Instead of saying, let's put bike lanes all over the place, I said, this is a crappy mall that exists in our community. The city has plans to make it better. Let's form a community coalition and bring together ideas who want to see things change. There's people in our group who love driving and they want to keep parking there, but they also see that the existing situation sucks. So I think we can do more to take maybe a big tent approach. It's not just about bikes. I mean, that was the whole point of my talk. But yeah, understand that cycling is part of the solution, and when we embed it into things like walkable communities and sustainable development, then everything is better off.
Hey, Matt, nice to see you. Regarding the Bank Street Bridge and sort of tactical urbanism more broadly, do you think that there's a space in Ottawa for radical tactical urbanism and sort of taking back the streets? Yeah, let me know your thoughts.
So the cool part about my job is I don't just work in Ottawa. I get to see what other cities are doing. And something that both of our closest big cities, Toronto and Montreal, have done in the last, say, 5-10 years is they've done what they call quick build infrastructure. They come up with buy-in for a general idea, they do a basic design, they implement it in a few weeks, and then it's there in real time for people to interact with and provide feedback on, and then things can be moved based on issues that arise. I think this is totally something that we need to do more in Ottawa. Instead of letting designs get made in a vacuum of professionals arguing with each other, we need to come up with basic ideas, put them out on the streets, and let the ideas sell themselves.
Is there a role for private funding to help accelerate some of these things? So be it funding design or even funding the city's budget for a particular area if you want to try and accelerate a project in your neighborhood, raising funds for such things?
I don't have an answer to that question. I think because these are things that the city is building for the public good, most of it is obviously going to come from our pockets and from our desire to fund these things. These things cost a lot of money, so if you're looking to chip in like $20,000, that'll buy you this much of a curb. But still, I think there's value maybe in the communication side of things to fund groups like Cycle Ottawa and give them more ability to reach more people with their ideas, and like we're really trying to spread the idea at this point.
So my question is, do you think you could give us the sort of 3 to 5 point plan? Why my mask stuck? For dealing with winter, both as an argument, like how do you talk to people about winter cycling and convince them that that's a real thing, and also infrastructure-wise, are we talking about salt? Are we talking about heat, fat, acid? I don't know. What's the solution to winter in Ottawa and in Canada?
So there was 2 questions I was anticipating. One was, how do you stay positive? And one was, what do you do about winter? So unprompted, well done. I have 3 different ways to answer that question. The first is that, again, going back to the thesis of my talk, if we build these bike lanes, even if no one is using them in the winter, the way that cycling infrastructure reshapes communities, benefits pedestrians, creates walkable environments, these are benefits that exist year-round, again, whether or not you're biking or not. Second point, I think it's really premature to dismiss the idea that people can't cycle in the winter. We have this thing called the Rideau Canal that people show up on the coldest winter days to skate for 2 hours at a time. They come from out of town. Millions of people do this every year. And at the same time, these same people will complain that it's too cold to bike. I don't get that. So I think there's a lot of evidence, especially from Northern European countries, when you build the bike infrastructure, people will do it more in the winter. They're not going to do it as much as on a nice summer day. We're never going to peak. We're never going to match our summer peaks, but people will do it more. And then the third way to answer that question is kind of on the same lens of like, why do we fund public outdoor pools? Well, they're only used 2 months of the year, but we still believe in the value of these assets. So how about the same thing for bike infrastructure? Even if you're only going to use it from May to August, don't you still want that benefit? Don't you still want your kids to be able to go and poke around and have fun on a nice day? So yeah, I think this idea that winter is a barrier is not fair.
I had a question, Matt, and I'll come to you afterwards. I was walking along the river yesterday on the walkway there, and then I saw portions of it flooded, and it got me thinking. A lot of our bike paths are built along the waterways. Do you have a creative solution as to how we can protect those bike paths moving forward? Because I think the flooding is going to be recurring every year as climate change accelerates. Yeah,
it's probably a good question for my NCC colleagues who are here. I'm sure there's lots of thought and plans being put into place for those. Yeah, I don't have any quick immediate design solutions, but you can trust that the people are working on it. And I think you had a question earlier too. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Veronique. I live in Stittsville. I don't own a car, so I can certainly appreciate the need for safe biking infrastructure in the suburbs. But right now, we have, like, our approach, as you mentioned at some point, is to sprinkle bike infrastructures everywhere. And so we don't have a network that is safe anywhere. Like, I can't take my kids to the grocery store safely on my bike. I can take them 3/4 of the way, but not quite there, right? And so as a result, I don't take my kids to the grocery store on the bike. It's just not safe for 300 meters, right? So I was wondering if you could opine on our approach to sprinkle biking infrastructure everywhere equally, as opposed to completing communities that are almost there, let's say in the core, and then building up to fully cyclable networks in the city.
Yeah, good question. That's why the city has the two-pronged approach, the approach of discreetly and subtly doing it wherever we rebuild a road. Like in Finley Creek, actually. Finley Creek is about to get cycle tracks and protected intersections, if any of you are wondering. And then the other part is our bike plan that just finished public consultation over a couple of years and gets funded from the city budget. We can do a lot more of those very targeted investments with more money, of course. I would love to see the cycling budget grow, of course, and I think that's the mechanism that we have to make those very specific connections. But make sure your counselor knows too. You got to tell your counselor. That's like the #1 thing that people need to do. Tell them that you want this change.